bit. One thing I'm struck by in all of this writing is the vivid detail and your memory of all of that. Did you do diaries or journals?
I started writing in my teens, and I was kept keeping something like a journal. It didn't really become a journal until I was living on my own in my 20s in my first apartment. Actually, that's not true. I started the first journal that I kept seriously when I was living in 103rd and Amsterdam Avenue with a semi-commune, and my room was the living room, so I didn't have a lot of privacy. But they were often out at work, and so I did have time to sit alone and write. I also was working as an artist model and making as much money in one day as my rent for the month took. And so I remember that whole summer and fall as me going into every museum in New York and spending hours and hours looking at everything I ever wanted to see, and then going home and writing about it. I don't have that journal anymore. I don't know where it happened or what it went. But the journals that I still do have, I started in around 1972, and they became, I was obsessive. I wrote in them 2 and 3 times a day. I would wake up in the morning, and while the coffee was brewing, I would sit down and I would just write. I would write out dreams, I would write out events of the day before, I would write anything and everything. And it took me about 3 or 4 years to realize that I was teaching myself how to write by doing that. And I love this moment. I had an affair with the poet Edward Field right after that Eric Bentley episode. And he told me, because he saw my early poems and he was encouraging, and he said, it takes 7 years to make a dancer's body. And you should think of that in terms of when you think about becoming a writer. It may take you that long to develop who you are as a writer. And I remember the day. I remember, I was writing in my journal and I was in the middle of a sentence, and I was always frustrated because I couldn't write as fast as I could think. I was trying and trying and trying. I could type as fast as I could think, but I wanted to do it longhand. And I remember I was in the middle of a sentence and I realized that at that moment, oh, I can finish the sentence this way, but if I do that, I lose this. But if I go that way, and I goes, oh, you have to make a choice. And suddenly all those comments that people have made to me for years that art is about making choices made sense to me. Oh, you have to make a choice sentence by sentence. And so I could relax a little because I said, well, you're always going to have to make a choice. You can't do all of it. And I stopped trying to write everything that was in my head all at once and started actually writing.
What type of writer were you thinking you were becoming?
Well, I had stopped writing poems because, my poetry and my drinking sort of have an inverse relationship with each other. I could manage to write while I was drinking. I could even write while hungover. I even still have probably a box full of drunken cocktail napkins with, whatever things scribbled on them. And so I was writing prose. And I wasn't thinking about it as anything other than, I was trying to save myself, actually, is what I was trying to do. I was trying to reclaim myself because I felt like I had lost so much of myself over the 10 years from the time I left home at 12, actually even earlier than that, until I started living on my own in my early 20s. To flesh that out, when I went away to school when I was 13 to a religious boarding school to join a religious order. I had a sort of vocation. My real vocation was to be a teacher, and that was a teaching religious order. And I thought, well, this works, because it was like it was the first exit sign I saw. Because the signs ahead were homosexual, illegal, queer, faggot, trouble ahead. What am I going to do about this? I'm going to leave home. I'm going to go hide in a religious order. A lot of people I know did that or tried to do it. But in order to do that, I had to give up a lot. I had to give up any contact with my family and all my friends in my neighborhood. I had to give up the 2 things that I loved most. When I was a boy, I thought I was going to become a painter, and I had to give up painting and drawing and figure skating, which I got pretty good at on my own. And I went down to Southern Maryland, where I was suddenly, clearing underbrush and painting crosshatch fences and cleaning toilets and having scullery duty and chapel 3 times a day. And I had given up a lot, and it took me a long while to recognize that. And so the writing was an attempt to get myself back to me. And it took a long time, but it worked. It really, I had to pay attention. So.
What about oral storytelling? I'm just curious.
I've never been tempted by that. I
You're
mean, people,
such a natural storyteller.
I know
I'm just
people, I mean,
wondering what
I
you're
do it all the
imagining.
time on jobs and with conversations and with whatever, but the idea of actually doing it as, you know, like people have said to me, you gotta go to the Moth, you have gotta go to the Moth, and I said, no, I wanna write these things, I don't wanna, it's a different thing altogether. And the reason I love writing is that I can work on it. I mean, you know, these things may appear very simple when you read them, but it will take me 26 drafts to get it that simple. I mean, I will work and work and work until, I want you to read the first sentence and not have to stop to think until you get to the end. I mean, I just want to be like you go down a slide, it's that smooth and easy, and I work at that. And I don't think you get that when you do extemporaneous talking. You get some great things, but they're lost for the moment. I mean, they're just, you know, unless someone's taping it. You know Jimmy Caston?
No.
No, you know, a lot of us here do. Wonderful storyteller. I wish he would write them down. I mean, he does these performances in which he tells stories from his life, and they're magical, but he doesn't write them, and they're gone. So.
I know that there was a chapter that you were hoping to write to include in this book that was you didn't wind up doing and was a challenge that hasn't come to you yet. And I'm just wondering if you could just talk about what was elusive about the chapter on Sidney Faulkner, since he is
right.
mentioned in one of the stories, but he's not
Oh, boy.
completely portrayed.
I know.
And maybe some people here knew him, I didn't.
I don't know if anyone here knew Sidney Faulkner. Probably not. Sidney was one of those old-time village characters who do not exist anymore. Just don't. He was a 50s queen, came up in the 50s, I mean, and was a fashionista before the term was invented, created fashion breakthroughs in his mind, and actually genuinely all the time. And he kept house on 11th Street. He had a studio apartment with a terrace that was rent controlled, which was just delightful. And it was a meeting place. I mean, it's where I met Charles Ludlam, because Sidney and he were having an affair. It's where I met, you know, half a dozen other people that I became really good friends with. And it was like an open house. And Sidney just nurtured all of these young gay hippies. You could show up at his house at any time of the day. And if he was there, he would let you in. He didn't have a phone, and you just had to buzz, and he would let you in. And there were times when he appeared in a couple of Charles Ludlam productions. And the one that's most memorable is he played an elderly woman who makes an audience interruption during the play Hot Ice. And he was dressed in this outlandish outfit. I mean, a lime green pantsuit, polyester, a snood, you know, big lacquer red nails. But the whole time that he was in that performance, at home, he wore a snood with the crotch cut out, and his hair hung down low, and his nails were the same, and he was naked from the waist up. And he answered the door like that all the time, having no idea who was coming. So the way you reacted when he opened the door was whether or not you got in. So some people, doors shut. Other people like, whoa, come on in. So, you know, Sidney was that kind of character, and he was a magical person. He was an incredibly talented artist, wonderful craftsman. I have donated as many of the needlepoint pieces that he made to the New York Historical Society as I could, because the craftsmanship is so extraordinary that the backs are as neat as the front. You could look at the back and not think that it was anything you had to work, you know. It was extraordinary. I mean, it almost looked machine made, but it was all done by hand, and they were all hand designed. What else to say about Sidney? He had the most voracious sexual appetite of anyone I've ever known. I mean, he's someone to write about. I just have never been able to figure out, all of the things I write have to have at the core a central story, and I don't know what the story I want to tell about Sidney is yet. And I think until I discover that, I can't really, I have made dozens of attempts over the years. I wrote one successful poem about him, only because it was the night he died and I was with him, and it was about that moment. But I couldn't do anything more than that yet, try as I might.
You mentioned his drag, and in the Coquettes chapter, you talk about the drag that you wore to sell copies of Steve Lawrence's newspaper. But there's also in the book, who drew a picture of you in drag,
drag,
and you're
right.
not somebody that did drag, so can
Well,
you?
I was not the way, I mean, I knew a lot of people who were really into drag. I was occasionally into drag. I mean, I joke today that I suffer from something I call MDD, multiple drag disorder. You never know who's gonna pop out next, when and if I do it. And so there have been several iterations over the years, but I've never been the person who was just like John Hayes, who was always in some form of cross-dress, even when he was dressed as a man. And other people that I knew who were constantly in drag, like Ethel, who, I mean, but also Ethel, you know, that was also her performance mode. So for me, it was also partly about some kind of performance publicly.
Can you talk about that picture that's in the book?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, that picture is of a character called Eleanor that, I mean, you'll read about this if you buy the book, please. I was the house electrician for Charles Ludlam's ridiculous theatrical company during the run of Camille. And I was back in school at that time, studying lighting design. When I met Charles at Sydney's house, he found that out and asked, because his house electrician was leaving, would I be willing to take over the job? And I said, sure. So I got $5 a performance to run the lights for Camille, but I also got to hang out with the Ridiculous for that whole season, which was heaven. I also had to go into 8 a.m. drafting classes with my lighting design course or whatever. But one night I went in to pick up my check, and Sydney, who was appearing as the butler in Camille at that time, said, you can't go to the party looking like that. And I said, what party? He said, well, it's Frank Zappa's 30th birthday. We've all been invited to the Hotel Roosevelt for his 30th birthday party. So the whole company was invited. I said, I have an 8 a.m. drafting class and I haven't done my lighting plot yet. He pushed me down into a chair and he put a wig on me. And then he started doing makeup. And then he went over to the costume rack and he took Lola Pachulinski's gown, what was Prudence. And the next thing you know, I was dressed as a 19th century French courtesan, and off I went to Frank Zappa's 30th birthday party. And I needed a name, and so someone said, well, Eleanor, I'm Eleanor. I don't know why. I just came up with Eleanor. And so Eleanor, she remained. And I would do Eleanor periodically over the years. Excuse me. Ethel would periodically, when Ethel was performing as Snafu, would say, will Eleanor come? I'd say, sure. Because Eleanor appeared the next time on Halloween one night. And my boyfriend at the time, who had gone to Cooper Union, was a wonderful painter. He had done my makeup, really beautifully detailed. He had used liquid latex and paint and made me, I was like an old woman. I was an old soak. I mean, I was just an old drunken woman, a wreck, but it looked real. And so I'm running around the streets with a shopping cart behind me, and I ran into Peter, who did not recognize me. And Ethel, she was working in the candle store. I walked in, did not recognize me. I walked in and Ethel's, lady, you can't. Oh, Ethel, you made my night. And she went, oh my God. And so, you know, Eleanor suddenly was now a character, and Ethel liked Eleanor to show up at her performances. So I would do Eleanor periodically. And Peter decided finally that we have to document Eleanor, because Peter periodically, he photographed me a half a dozen times, but never printed anything except those. And every now and then he would learn and said, oh, we didn't document that period of you. We didn't document that period of you. And I always kept thinking, well, you could have. So that's how Eleanor got born.
So a few times you've hinted to me that you're also, or I don't know if you started working on it, but you have in mind a memoir about your family, and I just wondered if you could say something about your inimitable sister.
Oh, okay. I am very shy about talking about this right now because it is a project I'm working on now. I am working on a family memoir, and the less I talk about it, the better, but I will talk about my extraordinary younger sister. The focus of the memoir is a sociological and intimate family memoir because all three of us were gay. Me, my younger sister, and my older brother, all of us. But the thing is, we all came out at different times. So I came out in 1965 when it was a horror show to come out. My brother waited until his career was set in the 70s, and nothing was going to disrupt that. And then he came out, and my sister waited until my mother died. And there was no more parents around to comment on this anymore. And so we all had very different experiences of what it's like to be a queer person in this society, which I think is interesting. We also had a very interesting family dynamic in that, well, the less I say the better, but Stacy, talented photographer, very frustrated in one way, in that, you know, she had the kind of tragic childhood that every Catholic schoolgirl in the country, after, you know, prior to a certain age, had. Catholic girls are just fucked. I mean, they're just fucking fucked. They're pressed down so relentlessly. They're told what's good and what's bad and who you can and cannot be. She was in a Catholic high school. She loved animals. She wanted to become a veterinarian. She was told repeatedly, girls do not become veterinarians. Girls do not become veterinarians. She finally left that school and went to a public high school. And when she broke up with one boyfriend, she said, all right, I'm not going to collapse about this. I am going to go back to school, and I'm going to learn how to be a surgical tech for veterinarians. And she did. And she graduated top of her class, and she worked for the next 10 years at the Animal Medical Center in Manhattan as a surgical assistant to veterinarians, and was happy as could be, finally. But this was in her 40s that this happened. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, all of that stuff that gets pushed onto Catholic girls. You know, my mother had no way of recognizing just how extraordinary and brilliant my sister was. I didn't realize it even towards the end of her life. She died of lung cancer at 65. But when I would visit her oncologist with her, I would sit there in awe, watching my sister have the most detailed, informed, intelligent conversation with her oncologist, who clearly recognized that he was talking to someone who knew exactly what the fuck she was talking about, and they spoke to each other. It was such a beautiful relationship she had with him, because she had created that. She could talk to him because she had done her homework. She wasn't, you know, crazy. She wasn't trying to get, you know, look for a miracle. She wanted realistic advice. She wanted to know what was going on, and she could handle it. You know, I mean, I was in awe of my sister. She was really and she was also my dealer. You know, I bought my first ounce of grass from her when she was a sophomore and I was a freshman at Brooklyn College. She was already dealing then. I mean, I found out years later what the origin story for that was. I mean, she later became a major coke dealer. That's a whole other story that I don't want to go into.
Okay, let's see if anybody wants to ask anything.